Good evening, I'm Barkha Dutt. You're with the Mojo story. India is facing its worst power outage in the month of October since 2016. This, of course, is connected to the shortage of coal. The government says the situation is under control, but is it really? Let's bring you the main developments on the program today. While the coal minister says that India has enough stocks to last 22 days. At least 70 thermal power plants are talking about stocks that will not last more than 4 days. Several states, including Rajasthan, Punjab, Bihar, among them, and Delhi, are already talking about load shedding, that is, having to cut electricity supplies because of a shortage of coal. Former Coal Secretary Anil Swarup is blaming both the center and the states, saying that this is due to a stagnation in coal production by Coal India. Now, many international factors are also being cited for this shortage, including a shortage of coal in China as well as an increase in international prices. But is the crisis upon us being handled? What should the government, both center and state, be doing at this point? And what are the larger lessons from it so that this crisis does not repeat itself? It's a crisis that many energy experts say was in the making and will recur if the response to it is simply to make quick fix solutions. That is our focus on this broadcast today. We'll be talking to a range of experts to decode and break down the coal crisis and ask how big the crisis is or whether this is a routine shortage. Let's bring up our panel of experts on the program today and introduce them one by one. We're joined by Gurcharan, a well-known analyst and economist. Also joining us on the program today is the former chairman of Coal India, Mr. Partha Bhattacharyya. Welcome to the program, sir. We're also joined by expert Ashwini Swain, who's with the Center for Policy Research. And we're also joined by Gopal Agarwal, leader of the BJP. I think Namaskar, sir, I must start this with the former chairman of Coal India, Mr. Bhattacharya, to tell us whether what we're seeing right now, sir, is different from what we've seen before. Talking earlier to former Coal Secretary Anil Swarup, he said shortages are not uncommon. India has often dealt with them, but there's never an attempt to find a structural, permanent solution. And he spoke about a stagnation in Coal India and identified that to be the key problem. Do you agree with that, sir? What do you think is responsible for this current crisis?
Uh, well, it's a fact that this crisis is not for the first time. It has happened in the past and it has been tided over. Now, what Mr. Swarup has said is factually correct. For the last three consecutive financial years, 2018, 19, 19, 20, and 2021, the coal production and offtake has stagnated at about 600 billion tons. But at the same time, every year, at the end of the year-end stock of coal, both with Coal India as well as with the power stations, were very comfortable. In fact, if you look at 2021, the last financial year which has gone by, Coal India ended up with a record stock of 100 million tons by producing only 600 million tons. So if it would have produced more, that would have gone into stocks only. So it is not the stagnation in production which has resulted in this crisis. That is number one.
Okay.
What has added to the crisis is actually what has happened is the power capacity, the power consumption has been rising, but not in at a very sturdy pace because the economic growth was somewhat not very strong, and so the power consumption was increasing by 4 to 5% per year. And in the last 5-6 years, if you look at it, we have added renewable capacity, and the incremental power consumption was largely met by renewables. And renewables had a special place because they had a priority in offtake. And that is the reason why the thermal power consumption has not risen. Therefore, coal production and offtake has not risen. It was not difficult for coal production to rise if the demand was there. But there was no demand. And
So you're saying that when the former coal secretary says that there's a stagnation in production, you're saying the production was proportionate to the demand, and the demand has risen only now in this manner that the production is falling short. Is that your argument, Mr. Bhattacharya?
Very correct. That is
okay. Okay, he also makes the argument that the states have defaulted on payments to discoms for years altogether, preventing the discoms from having money to pay to the generating companies. He also says that there have been strange policy decisions. For example, I didn't know this. He said that coal mine managers were used to dig toilets. Money was used to open more fertilizer plants instead of thermal plants. Do you agree with this skepticism and this cynicism?
That the coal mine managers should not be required to really create toilets. I mean, that can be outsourced to somebody who is good in creating toilets. The mine managers need not move out. But to say that this is the reason for the current crisis, I don't think that is actually the issue. The issue is not there. The issue is somewhere else. We have to find that out. Because, you see, particularly if the coal production has not grown, that has not grown not because the company is incapable of producing. It is because the demand was not there. And if it had produced, it would have been only added to the stocks. The stocks at the powerhouse end was also comfortable. Here also it was comfortable. So what is the point in producing where there is no no demand? So I think that is the issue. What has happened in between? Yes, because of the stagnancy in coal production and offtake, there has been certain amount of complacency in the system. And as a
Right.
result of complacency, two problems took place. One, the power stations forgot that they had to build stocks. They had to create certain shock absorbers in the system by building stocks as per the CEA prescribed norms. And the norms are 15 days to 30 days, depending upon the distance of the power station from the coal mine. That
Okay.
they failed to do. So that the first shock absorber was not there. Then they became complacent in the sense that they refused to pay. They were not paying Coal India. And Coal India were supplying coal, also borrowing money from banks to pay salaries. The receivables went up to 23,000 crores 2 months back. Now it is 18,000 crores. So these two these two problems on the power sector side has added to the the crisis now
So, so,
because
so, 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 so let me just jump in here because the last seems to be the structural issue. You're saying Coal India is borrowing to pay salaries, discoms are not paying, states are defaulting on payments. So the problem actually more than one of production, at least according to Mr. Bhattacharya, Gurcharan, let me bring you in and then I'll go to Gopal Agarwal, seems to be of how the economics is structured rather than the production of coal itself. Gurcharan.
Absolutely right. And Mr. Bhattacharya is also right. The fact of the matter is, let's divorce the present crisis from the real issue, which is the structural problem, and that has existed for decades since the license Raj days, when we nationalized the coal mines, we declared power distribution to be a government job. We did not allow the railways. Railways remained a public sector undertaking. So essentially, every few years we've had a crisis like this one, which relates to power running out from homes. And I remember in the 70s we had it, 80s we had it, every decade, once or twice you
But
have
you
it.
know, you but
Now
you know
the
the phrase.
basic,
Sorry. Just wanted to make a brief observation. The phrase "load shedding." This was a phrase from our childhood. One
yes,
didn't think load shedding would return to the India of 2021.
yes, and the reason why it still exists, Barkha, is the structural problem that you have a a public sector mining company which mines the 80% of the coal is mined by them. You have a railways which transports this coal to the power stations. A lot of the power stations, that's also public sector. You also have the power stations are public sector. You have the discoms, the distributing companies who distribute power, who are hugely politicized. A huge rot is there because there's a lot of corruption also. And so I think one of the lessons we have to eventually, come up to here is that, we've just, you know, got rid of Air India. The government has got rid of Air India off its back. Now, this is a lesson to learn, that here was a very finely run airline and the government ran it to the ground.
Yes.
And I'm not saying that all public sector units are like that. There's some very good ones. And Coal India is actually one of the good uh, public sector
But
companies.
but you're saying that to get past the structural contradiction of how the economics are managed, you
Yes.
actually see in this crisis an argument for privatization.
Yes, exactly. And certainly, I would begin really with the distribution of power. This
Okay?
business of being able to give every government that comes, even Kejriwal wants to give free power. It's not just a problem of one party or the other. And so you have to bring responsibility there. Now the states, which the places which have actually got done a good job, like Delhi, for example, has a private supply of power. Calcutta has private supply. Bombay has private. And these are far better. If you go out of these places, you know how terrible the power situation is. You talk about load shedding.
Yeah.
There's Even today, when India is actually surplus in power. I mean, it's just this is a glitch right now, but basically, India is surplus in power. We can sell power to many
Okay.
countries.
I hear
So
you. I want to understand from you what do you think should be privatized? Is it the entire chain? And I want Mr. Bhattacharya also to briefly respond, and then I want to go to Gopal Agarwal of the BJP. Gurcharan, briefly,
yes,
what do you want to see privatized?
you have to start with the state electricity boards, create
Okay.
competition, create open them up, and secondly, you can do this actually in a way that's politically possible. There are papers. World Bank
Okay,
wrote a
hold that thought. Let's take your idea around the panel, and we'll understand from you
yes,
more. Yeah,
quick one. Now,
yeah.
last we tried to allow 150 lines, 150 trains on Indian railways to be private. This happened just a few months ago, and not a single supplier, no private player bid for that. Why? Because there was not a independent regulator. I was on the railway committee that
Yeah.
had proposed this, and you have to create conditions also for
Okay.
that privatization.
Okay, so that's why I'm saying
Otherwise, private players won't come.
hold your thought, because I first just want to see if our experts agree with you that that's the route, that's what this crisis is crying out for. Paran Balakrishnan joined us a little late, so I didn't introduce him. Senior journalist who's been writing on this issue is also with us. Mr. Bhattacharya, very briefly, because I want to go to Gopal Agarwal of the BJP. Do you believe that privatization is the answer? Because after all, if the state electricity boards were private, I don't think state governments could afford to not pay them.
Well, I'll restrict my comment to coal.
Okay.
Basically, you see, we are a country which consumes 950 million tons of coal and produces 750. The balance 200 is made by imports, out of which 70 to 80 million tons goes into power generation. Now, today, one of the problem is that particular imported coal segment, the prices have shot up the roof. So there's a three-time price increase, and therefore that import is not happening, and that's creating a strain on the system. Now, what needs to happen is this should be made by privatization, in the sense that the commercial block allocation which we are doing now, had it been done 10, 15 years ago, then I think you would have never faced this kind of a situation today. But it has happened, it has started. So 2020 is the first year when the coal blocks have been allotted for commercial mining. That is basically to complement Coal India's efforts. As these come up in the next 4 or 5 years, I think that will be the structural change in the system, which will address the
Okay.
problem very, very significantly.
Okay,
That would be
let me open this up. Gopalji, to you now. The fact is that when I was listening, we were interviewing Anil Swarup, the former coal secretary, and he said both the center and the state have different responsibilities. Most of the coal today, by coincidence, is actually in non-BJP states, and he said that the coal policy of India cannot be managed from Delhi. You actually have to have officials stationed in the states where these thermal plants are, where the mines are. Secondly, of course, he gave the example of mine managers being deployed to construct toilets. Thirdly, he spoke about the top position of Coal India remaining unappointed for a year, pointed to the complacency in the system. How do you see the present crisis, sir? Gopalji, you're on mute.
Now, hello. I
Okay.
will talk on three issues here. One thing is that now, from your panel discussion and the discussions which we are seeing and reading in the newspaper, for some 2 3 days is that the issue is more of a management and not only availability, as Mr. Bhattacharya has also told. The issue is not purely availability of coal, but the management and distribution of coal. One thing. Second point I would like to highlight, underscore here is that many times I feel that certain opposition ruled states chief minister feel happy that there is some kind of crisis or some kind of anxiety in the people, and they do not try to coordinate and resolve the issue. The third thing I would like to say on Mr. Gurcharan Singh ji's comments is that market economy, the dependence on the economic forces, decision making, allocation of resources has to be left to the market forces. And privatization is one of the answer, but the partial privatization will not be a solution to the whole problem. I'll just give one example. Delhi has a private discom. Basically, I agree with Bhattacharya and Gurcharan ji is that the problem is of distribution line, discoms, because they don't pay. I was on the board of National Northeast Electric Power Company for several years. The state governments were not paying their dues. And how a company can run, even when we were producing hydropower, we had surplus power, but the discoms were not paying. We had to stop the supply. Then there will be hue and cry in the state, and then they will force to supply and not pay. So these kind of issues are structural problem. They have to be managed, and this is very important. I'll just give you Delhi's example. What is happening in AAPs? They have privatized distribution, but what they are doing, they are just creating regulatory assets, not even paying them, those private companies, the payment which they are subsidizing to the people. It is the companies are creating regulatory assets in their books like oil bonds, which they have to finance from the bank. Ultimately, who will pay? So this whole structure of economic management is to be we have to understand that this kind of things will not be acceptable. We have to change the narration also if political decisions have to be taken in a
What
on
is
the economic consideration.
what is your appraisal about the immediate situation, Mr. Gopal Agarwal?
One thing is, I agree with Mr. Bhattacharya, and the finance minister has also said that the issue is not of availability but management of distribution and the problems of discoms. When the elected CEA has said that you should keep a stock of 22 days, this coal minister, they said they are shown the letters that we had written to the state government and discoms to keep and generating company to increase the stock of their coals. They did not do. So ultimately, finally, we are moving through reducing the dependence of the country on thermal power. The policy of the government is that, as it is as a it is a concern on the climate side also. We have to reduce our dependence on thermal power generating plants. The government policy over 5 6 years was in that line, but ultimately at present it is more because the discoms are not able to pay. They are not paying, and the freebies that which some states
Yeah.
are announcing, it will further complicate,
Okay.
and then they are jumping to the issue that they are
Let
seeing this
me
as an opportunity to the blame the
So,
central government.
so one new thought that has emerged from this is that freebies, that power freebies must stop, and that if state electricity boards were private, state governments would find it tougher, or any government, doesn't matter which party, to default on those payments. Let me just get Paran and Ashwini in. Ashwini, I'll start with you. Firstly, there is also a disagreement between the
Just
center and the
Barkha ji,
states.
one Barkha ji,
Yes, yes, yes.
10 seconds.
Bataiye,
Another
bataiye.
thing is, if the any state government is announcing freebies, they should incorporate into their budget. This issue of not incorporating and paying the, it is much more worse than just if they want to give
But there has
freebies.
to be a
Okay,
political consensus on this, because every party objects to this, but there many parties have different kinds of freebies. Your point is taken that this crisis is telling us that power freebies cannot be at the cost of the discoms, and then the states don't pay. Ashwini, please go ahead.
Yeah, I'll pick up on the freebies point. So, electricity has been an important electoral currency at the state level, particularly when it comes to state elections. And year on year, we see competitive populism, parties committing to 200 units, 300 units, freebies. So, the problem is not providing free electricity or subsidized electricity to people. In fact, a certain section of the society may need help, but the problem is governments not paying to the discoms in lieu of that, as has been pointed out. And as per the law, this subsidy amount has to be paid upfront, but almost no state provides that. And in practice, this is generally adjusted to the electricity duties collected by the discoms. So that leads to the problem. And in fact, going back to the coal problem, and I just want, I mean, I agree with what has been said by other panelists. I just wanted to point out that this is not an uncommon event. This has been almost an annual moment in center-state relation and in India's energy system. Every monsoon, there is some shortage in coal, and states complain about, states raise alarm about blackouts, and this always goes, and then letters are sent to center, center comes for respite. But the challenge is this time it has come down pretty low, and the structural problem here is the gencos are supposed to pay upfront for coal procurement, but they get paid later from the discoms, and discoms are even paid later from the consumers. Consumers delay payment. So that structural problem has to be addressed. But I'm not sure. I'm not opposed to privatization, but I don't think privatization is the silver bullet. I mean, panelists suggested about Delhi, Calcutta,
But
Mumbai,
then if
but
there's no privatization, the law already says the state governments need to pay their dues up front, but nobody is doing it. The discoms, without being private, do not have the autonomy to stand up to governments, Ashwini. Then what is the solution? And we'll come
well,
back to solutions, but I'll let you get a sentence in, then I want to go to Paran Balakrishnan. Go ahead, Ashwini.
yeah, just two quick points. One, also wanted to point out that Odisha was one of the first state to privatize discoms. We don't talk about Odisha experience when it comes to privatization. And again, as Mr. Gopal pointed out, in case of Delhi, even with private discoms, we are accumulating regulatory assets. So the point is not ownership of the distribution, but incentives for the companies who are operating distribution. How do you create right incentives? Why they need to perform? And then we'll come to further solutions later.
Okay, let's look at the solutions in a little while from now. But let me first go to Paran Balakrishnan. There isn't even an agreement on how bad the situation is. You have the center saying there is no shortage. We're set for 22 days of coal stocks. You have 70 thermal plants saying we have stocks for 4 days. There isn't even an agreement, Paran, on the problem.
Yeah, that's true. And I think partly it's been aggravated by the fact that imported coal has become so expensive. Normally, we might have bought more coal from abroad, but the power stations don't want to do that at the current prices. I think they've risen about 100% since May, and it's about 240 $240 a ton now, which is much higher than last year. And I think that's added to the problems.
Do you believe that the problems are external, or do you believe that the problems are more internal?
No,
Because
the
you know
problem
the rise in
is
international prices, the shortage in China, we have no control over these issues.
the problem is mainly partly the distribution companies, which are the biggest, or have always been the biggest offenders. They've we've never been able to find a way to. We've privatized generation, but we haven't got the distribution needs to be fixed mainly. I think I'm
You're
sure
here.
that.
You're hearing a lot of our panelists today talk about privatization. Do you think that's the magic pill, Mr. Balakrishnan?
Well, it might be, but then will the governments pay them? That's the issue. I mean,
Yeah,
the state government has to pay them also, whether
yeah.
they're private or public. Where
And
does
the
the money?
state, and where did the money come from? That's always the elephant in the room, right?
Yeah,
Gurcharan, let me take that straight to you. Go ahead.
Look, what did China do yesterday? China has finally said that the price in the market for electricity will be determined by the market. It's a very big move. far, far ahead of India. You're talking about incentives. You can say, oh, I won't privatize, but I'll give the right incentives. The best incentive is the one that the market gives you. The private sector distribution company, if it does not pay it, will not supply the power. So the state government has a choice between going dark or jailing the managing director of the company. I mean, the point is the market. Here we are saying, let's give incentive. For 70 years, we've been saying, let's give the right incentive. Let the private public sector be given autonomy to operate along the market. We have failed to do that. And so the best, this is in the Soviet Union, this was the big argument.
But the argument against it, Mr. Das, would be that there are many poorer people in India who cannot afford that. So why not have differential pricing? Why isn't differential pricing the solution?
Barkha, the answer is not differential pricing. The answer is debit. Go and give transfers, cash transfers to the poor. Don't muck with the market. If you start fooling with the price mechanism, there'll be other distortions created. So for the poor, I'm all for giving the poor, but give it in cash. And this comes to every area, whether it's agriculture pricing.
So you're saying let the prices of electricity be the same for everybody.
The way China's do now.
All right. It's an interesting thought. Let me get Gopal Agarwal to respond to it, and then I'll go to our former Coal India head, Mr. Bhattacharya. Gopalji.
Barkha, I would just like to say that ultimately, if the governments start paying for whatever freebies they are providing, it is the problem that the state governments are not paying to the discoms. Who will pay if you are ready to transfer money to the poor people sections? So then why don't you pay the discoms? If you want to give cheap power to farmers or any other segments or poor segments, at least state governments have to pay, because electricity distribution is a state issue. Second thing is, ultimately, finally, we will have to work on a system of complete reforms in the discom, as we have found that it was so difficult to privatize Air India. Simply saying that the privatization will solve the problem is not going to solve it. I don't agree with, I have worked with PSUs, etc., fully, that PSUs are not efficient enough. They are.
It's not the PSUs that aren't efficient.
It is the government. State governments are not responsible.
If
they have the money to pay, they can. If they have the money to go for differential pricing, at least somebody will have to bear the cost and pay to the discoms. So this is a criminal offense this state governments do, and then they cry to the center. This structure has to be rectified, and I think discoms need a very strong willpower of reforms, and that will come from a proper narration from everybody that it's high time discoms are reformed. You see, ultimately who will pay? The banks are exposed to more than 2 lakh crores of exposure to the power sectors, and finally who will pay? So it's a taxpayers' money. So we all have to work on this thing and take a case that ultimately, if any government want to give subsidy to any segment, it should pay from and incorporate into budget. We did this in this budget. Ultimately, it was slowly becoming the warehousing corporation. All these things were not being paid and created debt in the offside of the balance sheet items.
I hear you. Let me, in fact, take this to Mr. Bhattacharya. Sir, you said in the beginning that Coal India was having to borrow to pay salaries. What is the explanation that is given to you that you're put in that position? Or, why? Why is it in that position? Who do you blame?
Well, you see, I would say that the management has a right to enforce the fuel supply agreement condition, which requires power stations to pay first and then take the coal. Now, the question is, it again gets into a little political kind of a problem, So basically, the states where maybe the ruling party is not in power or somebody else is in power, there if it is enforced in a big way, usually there will be a signal from the Ministry of Coal that okay, go slow, that kind of thing. I mean, I'm not sure because I'm not in that hot seat, but I guess that this is the kind of situation that will happen, and time to time, it has become a little difficult to enforce that particular condition.
So
But
who do you
if it
blame,
is,
sir? Who do you blame? Who do you blame for the fact that Coal India has to
I would,
borrow to
I
pay
would, I
salaries?
would also blame Coal India management. I mean, why should they give coal if the payment is not forthcoming? I mean, we have regulated coal supplies. At least partial regulation should be done.
But which public sector unit will stand up to government? Which is why we come back to privatization, Mr.
No,
Bhattacharya.
there the question is that the government has to support the stand of the PSU to some extent. NTPC does it from time to time with the state governments. Coal India
Yeah.
also has done it in the past. We never allowed the outstandings to go up to that kind of level. So it can be done. It is not that it cannot be done. And one thing I must,
Yeah.
one aspect, if I may
One
be allowed
point
to bring
I
in.
want to enter here. One
Yeah,
just
yeah,
comment.
yeah.
Barkha what Bhattacharya is selling, I do not fully agree on that one point only. That I was in a board of a power generation company for 4 years. What happens is in a generating company you cannot stop thermal power is difficult, a different thing, but other than thermal power, hydropower and other, they cannot stop generating because then and if they are generating power they have to give. So ultimately what Gurcharan ji was saying, that we need a strong regulator in the full power sector, which has to enforce in a non-political manner these things, which needs and for any decision to be taken by political party, and strong narration by the people is also an
But
important
I
thing.
think where the fault line of this debate is, do you then need the government to get out of this sector? Mr. Bhattacharya, please complete your point.
Yeah, I mean, basically, you see, the coal is not into this category of hydropower because coal we have stopped in the past. We
Yeah.
have regulated supplies to states like West Bengal, where we are headquartered. We have done that. It is not impossible. The point that I'm trying to make is another aspect. You kindly have a look at it. This Coal India today supplies coal at a price which, even in energy terms, rupees per gigacalories, is at a discount of 70% to international prices. It has been always at a discount, but the discount has now gone up because the international prices have gone up. So
Yeah.
more Coal India is allowed to supply, the more affordable the power is going to be. So one has
That's
to do
interesting.
orient policies in such a manner that Coal India supplies are maximized to
So
power stations.
I think that's very interesting. I just want to take this to Paran and Ashwini. Paran, I think as Ashwini mentioned, power, electricity, these are highly political conversations. And I just do not see, even though others are urging here, the free market rules, any political party stepping out of the way and letting the free market dictate them. Do you see that happening? Paran, I'll start with you.
I think it's very difficult. I mean, at the end of the day, the last buyer is the state. The state government is there. How are you going to get around that problem? And the fact is, state government finances are completely, well, they're only about borrowing, nothing much else. So where does the money come from? So you
So
have to,
we keep coming back to whether it's Coal India, whether it's the discoms, or whether it's the state, we keep coming back to where's the money. And
yes.
therefore, we keep coming back to the state of the economy. Gurcharan, I know your hand's going up. I'm coming to you in a second. Ashwini, go ahead. You're on mute, sir.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let me first talk about DBT. DBT is a great idea in principle, but in practice, there several difficulties in Indian electricity, particularly. First, electricity connections are not in the current username. They're generational connections. So how do you identify beneficiaries? That's a big task. So we need to fix that first. Second problem, as pointed out by one of the panelists, if we do DBT, then the state governments have to pay that money every month to the users, to the needy users. So if the states cannot pay that money to discoms, how do we ensure that that money is being paid to the consumers? So those are the two big challenges for DBT. So then coming to whether free market rules can work in electricity, we need to bring in market principles, market disciplines in the sector of operation. But privatization and completely market-led pricing, probably the economy and the society is not ready for that. That needs fixing several structural issues first. And one of the issues I would point out is this subsidized electricity provision in states is often, we have a wrong strategy here. Often electricity is provided as a consumable. So you take electricity, use it, and then it's done. But electricity is a great input for economic activities. So
Yeah.
what we need
So
to
you,
switch
yeah.
the narrative from providing free electricity or revenue recovery. How do we use electricity for productive purposes so that the users are enabled to pay for electricity? So that approach has to be brought in. So
Yeah.
there's several issues there. How do we promote rural economic activity? How do we bring in raise
So it
rural
all
demand?
actually comes back to the economy. It actually, every
Yes.
single aspect of this conversation comes back to the economy, from freebies to where's the money, to whether this is a space that's ready for the forces of privatization. I've got to close. Gurcharan, last word to you.
Well, I think Air India is a very good sort of caution to all people who want governments to run businesses. And all, as I said, all PSUs are not bad, but ultimately I feel very sorry. There's some very fine managers in those public sector companies. But the reality is that the incentive system is all flawed. And no matter how good a manager you might have, the outcome will be suboptimal. And so, therefore, the more business activity can move, and even China, I mean, imagine yesterday's announcement that now all electricity will be market priced in China. And so, what I was saying was my idea of cash transfers is that we have a right, we must support the poor. We must support the poor. But by pricing is not the way to support the poor. The way to support the poor is just give them money. Give them money that goes from the center, from the states every single month, which is for, and then after that, let everything else be on market pricing. Because
Okay.
that then gives the right signal. Then you don't have this problem of states not paying the discoms and discoms not paying the generators,
Okay.
and the generators not paying the railways not paying the
I, I,
miners.
I do. Okay, I do have to close. Gopalji, are you opening your mic to say something? A quick last
Yeah,
word.
yeah,
What do
yeah.
you?
Just for 10 seconds. So to conclude this debate, which is a very important debate, I think we should at least, my conclusion is that the issue of whatever challenge we are facing in the power sector at the current situation is more of a management. And that management is more with the management of the discoms. And the third last point is that we should criminalize this regulatory assets issues, which is further will aggravate the problem. So the issue of power crisis, whatever is there, it's a management. Discoms have to be
I
rectified, and regulatory assets have to be
thank
stopped
you.
from being.
Thank you. I just hope that the government does pay enough attention to this in a way that goes beyond quick fix solutions, because as so many experts have pointed out, otherwise this will be an annual recurring feature. And really, in the India of 2021 cannot be talking about its electricity in terms of load shedding. Leaving it there, Gurcharan Das, Gopal Agarwal, Paran, Balakrishnan, and to you, Mr. Partha Bhattacharya, thank you so much, and to Ashwini, thank you, and to our audience, see you tomorrow. Same time, same place. Thank you for watching. Goodbye. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.